my name is John Kingsley. I am this year's president of the National Capital section of CITE. Thank you for coming today. Before we get started, I did want to thank our sponsors. So Stantec, Morrison Hershfield, WSP, CGH, Parsons, Novatech, Robinson Consultants, BT Engineering, JL Richards, and Dillon Consulting. We literally couldn't do what we do without you guys, so thank you very much for your support. So today we have a presentation on the new edition of the OTM Book 18. We are very lucky to have one of the co-authors of this edition as our presenter, but also it is my honor to serve with the presenter as on the CITE National Capital Section Executive. He is my vice president, and his name is Sean Smith. So thank you so much for being here, Sean. Sean is a senior project manager and engineer with WSP Canada, with 20 years of experience leading sustainable mobility projects. Sean is a design lead in WSP's Active Transportation Trails and Complete Streets Center of Excellence. Sean was, again, one of the co-authors of this update to OTM Book 18 and continues to serve as a lead trainer for the guide, delivering full and half-day training workshops to municipal and consulting staff to build knowledge about the new guide. He's helped train over 500 professionals across Ontario to date. And I will say, I haven't been paid to say this, but if you do want one of these sessions, these training sessions, for your organization, I'm sure if you got in touch with Sean, then he would be all too happy to discuss that with you, because I'm sure while it's going to be an amazing presentation today, it'll only be a taste of what all there is to this topic. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Sean, if I can find his name in this list. Here we go.
Thanks, John. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for the opportunity to share some highlights from OTM Book 18 update and some of the hot topics. I'm also going to take you on a journey today to see some of the new infrastructure that's been built across Ontario, which is quite exciting to see some of these design treatments actually be implemented.
Okay,
there I go. Yep, I now have access to share my screen. All right, so let's get started. First of all, so WSP worked with Alta Planning Design, as well as True North Safety and Marnie Peters Accessibility Simplified in the development of the guide. It started off, we looked at 12 research topics of interest, including like protected intersections and bicycle traffic signals and other things to help inform the guide. And then there I am with two of my kids on my e-cargo bike. And then there was quite an extensive technical committee that helped also through the development of the guide and provided valuable feedback. And it was amazing to see how engaged this committee was in the development of the update. And we tracked over 1,000 comments and multiple versions of the guide to get to the final, which was released last year. So the updated manual has 10 sections listed here, and it also it has an appendix with glossary, signage, and pavement marking reference. But so the 10 sections are expanded over I think there were 6 originally in the 2013 version. General information talks about the provincial context, like the Highway Traffic Act, the Cycle-On provincial cycling strategy, the e-scooter pilot, and some other things like that. Then design users considers what I'll discuss in a few minutes, the design cyclist, as well as some of the operating characteristics of cyclists. Network planning has expanded guidance on complete streets and planning for equity and Vision Zero and using geospatial techniques. Section 4 is all about linear bicycle facilities, so the different types, and there's a new type called advisory bike lanes, which I will discuss later today. Then section 5 is the facility selection process, and there still is that 3-step process. We've refined it so that there is now, I guess, lower thresholds for speed and volume and more physical protection for cyclists. Section 6 is really the meat of the guide. Intersections and crossings makes up over 100 pages of the 300-page guide, and there's a lot of new interesting stuff in there, a big focus on protected intersections, also different crossing types, and I'll get into that a little bit today as well. Other facility design treatments include things like railings and lighting and transit stops and accessibility and things that didn't fit in the other sections. Section 8 is all about implementing, so there's a 5-phase framework, and there's also some different explanation of different types of projects, cycling projects and case studies. Support features are things like bike parking and wayfinding. And then section 10 has maintenance strategies, expanded guidance on winter cycling networks, and as well the update of the minimum maintenance standards for Ontario highways. So when you think about the evolution of cycling facilities design, something that's built today is going to be a lot different than, say, 10 years ago. When people thought about cycling facilities in 2013, when the first guide came out, they were mostly thinking about on-street bike lanes. You could really see the difference here between the two covers, the left version in 2013 and the right version 2018, and now, is with the level of protection, the use of green treatment to highlight conflict zones. Vision Zero was just starting to make its way to Canada back then, and now it's been integrated throughout the design guide with different treatments like narrowing the turning radii at intersections and centerline hardening to discourage cutting the corner, to slow left-turning motorists. Things like that have been incorporated throughout the guide. And there's also a focus on all ages and abilities now, and that separated infrastructure. And this guide really sets the stage for that. So a big focus of the new guide is on this interested but concerned group of people, which makes up the majority of the population. And they have a strong preference for low stress cycling facilities. We want to design cycling facilities to appeal to a wider audience. You get better return on investment, more access to more people who can use it. So this philosophy has been incorporated throughout the guide, providing equitable access for all to key destinations. And one could argue that the previous version catered more to the somewhat confident group of cyclists, which make up only about 5 to 9% of the population and who are comfortable interacting with moderate speed of traffic. So, for example, using on-street bike lanes on busy roads. And there's also this highly confident group, made up, like I say, 4 to 7% that are comfortable interacting with even a higher speed of traffic. But that's a low percentage of the population. We really want to target this interested but concerned. So here are some examples of our design cyclist. And so it could be older adults who are interested in having a more active commute. It could be people out for a social ride, maybe some tourists, children and youth traveling to school, a parent taking their child to daycare, a person with a disability who uses an adaptive cycle. They may not be thoroughly familiar with the rules of the road. They value convenience, flexibility, and safety, and prefer low-stress routes. So when I think about my life, even though I may not fit into this interested but concerned category, I have a little bit more of experience and I'm fine riding with traffic. But when I'm with my kids, I'm definitely fall into this design cyclist category. So it's important when you're planning, designing cycling facilities to put yourself in this perspective. I have a series of 3 videos here. So the first one is a mixed traffic environment. I'll just play that. This happens to be on Somerset Street in Ottawa. And this is from the perspective of a cyclist. And you think about, as you watch this, the different stressors that they would feel. So, you've got parked cars on one side, you've got a turning motorist. You're sharing a lane with traffic, even though it is low speed, probably not comfortable for the average user. So that's example 1. Example 2 is physically separated bike lanes. So this is on Laurier Street in downtown Ottawa. We've got pinned curbs and bollards. So, what do you observe here? You saw that there was a grate that a cyclist would ride over. That fire hydrant seemed quite close, and then the mailbox here maybe could be a potential handlebar risk. You do have parked cars on the left, but with the physical separation. There are a number of driveways to cross here that are highlighted with green surface. When you come to an intersection, you've got you're riding next to traffic, so there is a potential of the right hook. And then the third example is cycle tracks. So this is on Main Street in Ottawa. So Book 18 defines cycle tracks as in the boulevard, so at different level than the roadway, so raised from the roadway, separated by the curb. It could be an intermediate height between the road and the sidewalk, or it could be at sidewalk level. So here you could see there's good offset from the roadway. You've got a buffer with a full barrier curb. Crossings are marked with the green surface treatment. And then there is some separation between the sidewalk and cycle track with there's a delineator strip, and there is also some trees and utility poles. So think about those 3 examples. Which one, actually go back here, maybe you write in the chat, which ones do you think are appropriate for our design cyclist, the interested but concerned group of people? So 1, 2, or 3. Maybe you can enter it in the chat. Yeah, thank you, John. So you think 3, cycle tracks. Yeah, thanks, Mona. Yeah, Mark says 2 and 3. Yeah, so mixed feelings about number 2, whether it does appeal to our interested but concerned group. Maybe a lot has to do with how the intersection treatments are handled. Okay, I'll keep going here, thank you. There are 10 different cycling facility types identified in the new Book 18, and they're split into 3 different categories. Shared space, where you are sharing space with motor vehicles. Designated space, so separated by paint. And separated facilities where there's some sort of physical vertical treatment between motor vehicles and cyclists. And the rule of thumb is that as you increase in your traffic volumes and speed, you want to have greater separation. So moving towards the separated facility category. So in terms of facility selection and how you choose which facility type is appropriate for your street, there are now 2 nomographs in the first step of the facility selection process. This one is for the urban and suburban areas, and there's also a rural one. And just a few highlights. So you could see the white space in the bottom corner is where it's appropriate for shared operating space. And that goes up to about 40 kilometers per hour and maybe about 2,500 vehicles per day. And then we get into the light green, which is the designated space, the on-street bike lanes, up to about 50 kilometers per hour and about 6,000 vehicles per day. And then beyond that, we're looking at physically separated bikeways. So the physically separated bike lanes, the cycle tracks, or multi-use paths. A key change for Book 18 is that conventional bike lanes are no longer recommended on multi-lane roads, so roads with more than 3 lanes. And think about, you're probably more than 6,000 vehicles per day anyway, but this is a big change in the new guide. Here's the rule nomograph. So for the rule context, and the design, user, and implementation options do vary from the urban suburban. That's why there is a different nomograph for this. And so we still have the shared operating space at low speeds and volumes, paved shoulders, and then when you get to higher traffic volumes and speeds, consider having a buffer or even separating beyond the clear zone of the roadway with a multi-use path at the higher speeds and volumes. There's also, so that's just step 1. Step 2 takes a detailed contextual evaluation, so both like a desktop review and field review at different times of day and days of the week to look at other factors. And so this table here from Book 18 does help you narrow it down a little bit and consider other roadway characteristics like the function of the street, whether it's, say if it's a collector or arterial road, you're probably wanting to consider the physically separated. If there's a lot of buses or trucks in the curb lane, if you've got high pedestrian volumes, on-street parking, frequency of intersections and crossings is a big factor as well. So taking into all of these things and using engineering judgment, it may be that you go back to step 1 and reevaluate the facility type that you pre-selected. There's also increased guidance on separation techniques. So for example, this is for physically separated bike lanes. There's a whole variety of things from planters to concrete curbs to guide rail. So for example, if you have a posted speed of say 60 kilometers per hour, you probably want to have something that's more crash worthy than just say a flexible bollard or one of these like a planter. So and another factor is the width that you have available. Maybe you only have 0.3 meters, so you're not able to do a full thing like a planter. So this is just additional guidance that can help you choose which type to use, what treatment for separation. I do like these low wall concrete barriers that are in Toronto, and they do have, they've also incorporated some public art. So this is an example on Lakeshore Boulevard where they have these, and they've found they're appropriate for 50 kilometers per hour and less as a posted speed. Because you can see the end treatments do have that ramping. And you don't want to have it on those higher speed roadways. Okay, go back. Okay, so cycle tracks are a big part of the new guide, and so there's guidance on the one-way cycle tracks and two-way here. So the minimum width for a cycle track would be, it's suggested is 1.5, but the desired width is like 2 to 2.5, and you want to consider things like the level of usage, also incorporating things like micromobility devices and really future-proofing your route. So here's an example from Vancouver where they built wider than the minimum. So we've got a 2.3 meter cycle track. There's a delineator strip next to the sidewalk. And there's also a 1.5 buffer from the roadway. So there's guidance there on the setback required. Minimum would be 0.3 for the lower speed roadways, but you want to also try to increase that if you have the space, so it's not constrained, and a little bit more of a better user experience when you've got greater setback from the roadway. So just a couple of examples here. So this one is in the city of Vaughan, Clark Avenue, a recently reconstructed roadway. with cycle tracks. So if we look at the previous condition, there were no cycling facilities. So this is a big improvement. I was involved in this project, so it was really neat to see the transformation that's happened. And also, like we did incorporated things like narrower turning radius at the intersections. This is an adjacent crossing example, but there are a couple of setback crossings at busier roadways along the corridor as well. So just you can see the before and after. If I go back, let me go back a little further here. You can see the previous intersection crossing was a lot wider. Okay, and then I have an example in Waterloo as well, just to show you different types. So this was one that was implemented, and they actually had have a mountable curb here. Good separation from the sidewalk. You can see that planting strip or zone here. But they've incorporated bollards to encourage or keep motor vehicles out of the cycle track. Okay. So there is some guidance in Book 18 about the sidewalk cycle track separation. However, it's still an evolving field, and there's flexibility in how this is applied. Some municipalities are looking at using a form of curb. So it could be a vertical curb. Like the City of Ottawa has used a half-height vertical curb. This example here is a beveled curb from Vancouver to separate the sidewalk and cycle track. And you can see the cycle track is slightly lower grade. Or you can have them flush and have a tactile surface that is cane detectable with high contrast. Or probably the best option of all is having a planting or furnishing zone in between the sidewalk and cycle track to separate users. As I mentioned, there was a new facility type in Book 18. It's called advisory bike lanes. And it's used on roads that are too narrow to accommodate both two-way traffic and traditional bike lanes at the same time. So it's typically used on low speed, low volume roadways. So 30 to 50 kilometers, less than 4,000 vehicles per day. And one of the features is that there's no center line, and vehicles pass by entering the bicycle lane, but also yielding to cyclists. So it's a way to give priority to cyclists. It also benefits from a traffic calming effect, and there's a significant improvement in cyclist comfort. So there aren't too many examples right now in Canada of this facility type. The one pictured is from Newmarket on Park Avenue that was implemented to fill a gap in their east-west bikeway. And then there's also example in Ottawa and Somerset. So you could see here, which also incorporates on-street parking, and it also fills a need to complete a gap in the cycling network. So if I go back in time to see the precondition, that's what it looked like before and then today. So this has been in operation for a number of years. It's been studied. I know of at least one academic paper that had very positive results from this with positive safety outcomes as well. Okay, go back here. All right, on to the protected corner or protected intersection. So we heard about this from Emmett at a previous webinar where the City of Ottawa has released their new protected intersection guidelines, which is an excellent resource. I encourage you to look that up. But Book 18 also has some good guidance on protected corners, and some of the features here are the forward stop bar. We've got in the setback crossing of 4 to 6 meters from the parallel street. And this allows, first of all, to orient the motorist so that they're perpendicular to the crossing for better sight lines. It also allows a motorist to queue without blocking the through traffic on the street here. There's enough space for a motorist. And it also, having this tighter turning radii slows motorists down, and so better distance as well Yeah, so in this case, we've got a two-stage pedestrian crossing. If you don't have the space, you could do it as a one-stage pedestrian crossing and not have this queuing space in between the cycle track and the sidewalk if the minimum is 2.1. I'll just load up two examples here of the protected corner. This one was done in the city of London at Colborne and Dundas. And what they did was they had two physically separated bike lanes, so on each street, and they added this corner island here, protected island, and kept the curb for the sidewalk where it was. And so it could be also incorporated in a configuration like this where it is a little bit constrained. And this allows for a cyclist to make a right turn fully protected from traffic. Another example is in the city of Ottawa. Many of you may be familiar with. I chose the one at Dines and Fisher. And one feature here is that you've got a on-street bike lane at the approach on this particular leg that turns into a protected intersection, so it or a setback crossing. Whoops. So what it does is it ramps up into the boulevard at the approach. Oh, I'm into the parking lot here. So, you know, you don't need cycle tracks leading up to the protected intersection to make it work. There we go. And then you've got the setback crossing. I don't know why my cursor isn't working here. There we go. I'm into the intersection, and so you do have the two-stage pedestrian crossing, at least on this leg, and then there's cycle tracks on some of the legs up here. So yeah, so Ottawa's been doing some great stuff with protected intersections, really leading the way in the city, in the province of Ontario. Just to show it to you in action here. So you can see the space and visibility. The crosswalk is set back. So that was at Donald and Saint Laurent, Ottawa. And so it gives the motorist also more time to react to a cyclist by having that setback crossing. All right, here's an animation or rendering from City of Toronto at Bloor and St. George, where they're planning to have a protected intersection. It will be built next year. So let me just load that up. Here we go. It's a really neat perspective. Helps you visualize what is planned. So we've got the forward stop bar there. There's actually a near side signal, bicycle signal proposed. We've got a truck apron in front of the corner protected island. Very wide crosswalks here. This is a busy pedestrian area. So a lot of queuing space for cyclists, you can see as well. Those triangles, the shark's teeth markings are yield markings, so cyclists yield to pedestrians. City of Toronto uses chevrons as their markings through the intersection.
Which means shared. That doesn't make any fucking sense.
There's a mountable truck apron. Yeah, so there you go. Keep going here. Oh. Okay, now I lost my presentation. There we go. All right, yeah, I encourage you to enter your questions into the chat. I see lots of questions coming in, so we'll get to those at the end. Hopefully there'll be some good time for that as well. I'll try to end a little bit early to allow for that. So another type of crossing, if you don't have the space for the setback crossing, is the adjacent crossing, where it continues straight through, or you could bend in towards the roadway, drop down to road level, and cross straight ahead. So one of the advantages of this one is that it requires less space. There's also some information about protected signal phasing strategies. Although OTM Book 12A has a lot more detail about the installation of bicycle traffic signals. Book 18 provides some supplemental information, such as thresholds of when to consider protected signal phasing. Here's an example in Ottawa at Alberton Bay where protected signal phasing has been incorporated. So you could see the one on the left, the cyclist has the green signal and the right turning motorists are held back. And then the next phase, cyclists have the red and then the motorists get the right turn arrow. So Crossrides, there's still 3 types of Crossrides in Book 18. We've got the combined Crossrides, which are typically used for multi-use paths where pedestrians and cyclists are mixed at the approach. And then you've got the separated Crossrides, typically for sidewalk or cycle track. And then mixed Crossrides are for low volume, unsignalized crossings. These are all for in boulevard facilities. So we're using the elephant's feet squares, 0.4 meter by 0.4 meter. If you've got an on-street facility crossing, the recommendation is to use a skip line instead of the elephant's feet. So I wanted to show an example of a crossride that was done in Ottawa. And this was at Colonel By and Seneca. And even though they had a multi-use path on either side, the city decided to separate the users at the crossing. So this is how they've done it. And then it merges back to the multi-use path beyond there. So I thought that was really well done here as an example. Okay, keep going. We can get back, there we go. Facility transitions, so there's lots of different types of transitions. This one shows for going from a 2-way cycling facility to a 1-way at an intersection using pavement markings and signage to direct cyclists on the correct path of travel. And an example of that in practice at the City of Ottawa on Heron Road, where it goes from a 2-way cycle track to a 1-way. Let's see if that loads up. Yeah, here we go. So we've got the 2-way cycle track, and then we've got the arrow, and so well, this is before. Whoops. See, it's relatively new installation, and just there's an advantage of transitioning before the intersection crossing. So there are fewer conflict points for cyclists if they're only going one way at the intersection itself. All right, on to uncontrolled crossings. So here's an example of a treatment that could be done where you've got a median refuge for pedestrians and cyclists to break up the crossing into 2 stages. It makes it really more comfortable to do that. You can also have an S-curve at the start to encourage cyclists to slow, so the use of signage. And this example I thought is a really good one, high-speed roadway with a crossing, and they've staggered the crossing so that it orients the cyclist to face the oncoming traffic, so they wait for a gap. And just to show that here at Sir George Cartier Parkway, yeah, I thought it's a really effective treatment to make that crossing safer. Okay, let's go back here. Another treatment that could be considered is a raised crossing. So the figure on the left is for an uncontrolled raised crossing, but this example on the right is in Ottawa is at a PXO, and this is on Queen Elizabeth Driveway. I thought, again, it's also a very effective treatment to prioritize pedestrians and cyclists and improve safety. So you've got a busy pathway on the left to a major park on the right, and implemented the raised crossing with the PXO. Okay, relatively new treatment in North America is this concept called continuous cycle tracks or continuous sidewalk. And it's where the sidewalk continues uninterrupted across a driveway or a minor intersection, unsignalized intersection, and at the same grade, the same material through the crossing. So it helps to prioritize pedestrians and cyclists. The example in Nanaimo, BC has been getting a lot of positive attention. And I know that a number of municipalities, including the city of Ottawa, are looking at this type of design and trying it out in projects here. So you can see here there's a bit of a ramp. You do need the space from the curb, about 1.5 meters, to be able to ramp up to the sidewalk level. So this is an example at a street, but it's also been done, at driveways as well. So yeah, really effective. It's used a lot in the Netherlands, and it's making its way over here too. Okay, I'll keep going on to ramp crossings. So there are two types identified in Book 18. If you've got a high-speed diverging ramp crossing, you really want to have pedestrians and cyclists wait for a gap. So no markings across the crossing. Just for safety purposes, we found that it's not desirable to have the marking crossing. But for lower speed diverging ramps, it might be appropriate to have the crossing go right across the ramp. So I have two examples here. The one on the left is in Cambridge, Highway 401 and Franklin Boulevard. It was implemented a few years ago. Effective use of crossing with a wait for gap for pedestrians and cyclists. And then the one on the right is kind of downtown Toronto, where it's a lower speed context at Bay Street going on to the Don Valley Parkway or Gardner Expressway, sorry, where they've continued the crossing straight through. Right turn channel, so some good guidance here. Here's an example that was built recently in Sudbury, where they've have a raised crossing of the right turn channel. We do have a lot of these right turn channels in the city of Ottawa as well. We're also introducing this new pavement marking type for raised crossings. It's used a lot in the US, so it's not confused with the yield markings. In the past, we've had the raised crossing kind of the other direction of these triangles, and it could be confusing to the average user what it actually means. Just quickly to show an example in Ottawa on St. Patrick Street that I thought was very effective use of a crossing. So the previous design had I have to go back a few years, had what we call a floating bike lane. It's hard to see here, but there's a really long conflict zone, merge zone, where the drivers have to get across to get into the right turn lane. And then the new design takes the cycle track, well, it actually ramps up the bike lane into the boulevard and then goes across a raised crossing where motorists have to yield to pedestrians and cyclists. Okay, transit stops, as I mentioned, are covered in section 7 of the new guide. So there are two types for cycle tracks. The first one is called the island boarding transit stop, and that's where the cycle track goes behind the loading area. This is preferable when you have enough space to do it. And then there's a dedicated crosswalk for pedestrians to get across where cyclists yield. And the other option is a shared cycle tracks transit stop where the cycle track goes in front or through the loading zone, yielding to pedestrians and cyclists. So those may be familiar with the Sherburne style City of Toronto design, which is this type. So in London here on Dundas Street, it has been implemented as island boarding. So you can see the cycle track in behind and the waiting area in front. This was built fairly recently. And then in the this example here in Clark Avenue again in the city of Vaughan, where it's a shared stop and cyclists go through. There should be some yield markings. I think this photo was taken before they were actually installed. But, yeah, and almost at the end here. I think I've got just two more slides or 3 more slides. So wanted to mention the Book 18 training. We go into a lot more detail and have some hands-on exercises where we take some actual streets and try to add cycling facilities with this cross-section exercise using street mix, and look at and kind of brainstorm ideas in breakout groups. We also take intersections and try to redesign them. So here's an example where we've tried to implement a protected intersection at intersection in Hamilton, and some of our ideas there. Yeah, so it's just some, I'll leave you with 2 key takeaways. One is that design guidance for cycling has evolved quite rapidly to recommend protection of cyclists at lower speeds and volumes. And municipalities are updating their design standards and cycling networks accordingly. And the second one is the need to build a low stress, high quality cycling network. If we really want to see behavior change and see a modal shift to cycling, we have to appeal to a wide audience. And so do not forget about the design user, the interested but concerned, and also the intersections, because a cycling facility is only as good as its weakest link. And there's lots of tools in the toolbox in OTM Book 18. Road geometry and signal phasing can work hand in hand to improve safety and comfort for vulnerable road users. So I'll leave it there, and we'll open up the floor for questions.
Thank you, Sean. That was a fabulous presentation. I'm sure everybody here agrees. I'm going to run through some of the questions in the chat. If you think of any at the moment while I'm going through them, feel free to type them in and I'll get to them after. First off, from the start, Colin asked, will the slides or the whole presentation be available after today? Stephen replied that the presentation, the video portion, will be posted to the CITE YouTube channel. But Sean, are you able to share the slides for this, or are you?
Yep, I'm happy to share the slides. I don't know how we can do that. Maybe send it to the attendees. Is that like as an email? Would that be
Yeah,
best?
I'm sure we can figure
or we can
out
post it on our website. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll figure that out. But I think
Okay.
personally, I mean, I would love it just to have all those awesome examples, right, just at the ready. So thank you for that.
Sure.
So Marco asks, it might get mentioned, but I'm interested if there's anything about transitions between one-way and two-way cycle tracks. Sorry, between one-way cycle tracks and two-way cycle tracks across an intersection. We kind of touched on that. Is there anything more that you wanted to say about that?
Yeah, introducing two-way cycle tracks on two-way streets does add a lot of complexity. There are ways to do it and mitigations to help reduce the conflicts, but it's generally better practice to do one-way cycle tracks on. It's definitely more common. I mean, not that it can't be done. We've seen it on O'Connor in Ottawa and other streets. One thing that the city of Ottawa was doing is having some dynamic signage to identify or to help mitigate those left turn conflicts across the two-way cycle track.
Cool, thank you. Nelson comments, what is great about the Vancouver example is that they narrow the street travel lanes rather than reallocating the limited boulevard space and losing trees in the streetscapes. He even comments you could see the same trees in the before and after images. So that's yeah, definitely a great consideration.
Yeah, and just to note that we did that as well for Clark Avenue. It was a road reconstruction, so there was an opportunity to move curbs, and it was really successful because we minimize the amount of trees and utilities that were affected by narrowing the roadway by about 1 meter on either side, narrowing the lanes to minimum widths. So if that's definitely another strategy if you have that opportunity.
Very cool, very cool. Jennifer asks, do you need dedicated bike facilities leading up to a protected intersection? I guess, could you have a mixed flow situation that transitions to a protected intersection?
Yeah, you do not need dedicated. You could have a mixed. I'll show you an example. In Ottawa, where, no, it's not Riverside, it's Riverdale and Main Street, if I can get to it. There we go. So I love Street View, as you can see. It's a very handy tool. So here you've got a mixed facility, right? Your cyclists are on the street, but you ramp up into the boulevard to a cycle track as you approach the intersection, and then you have a crossing there. So that definitely can be done. It's a good strategy because intersections can be the most intimidating and also high safety risk for cyclists. So you can implement the protected intersection just about anywhere.
Yeah, that's great to see there, especially with that dedicated right turn lane. That's a good solution. Cool. It's awesome for thinking of an example on the fly too. Colin asks, does it make sense to split up a MUP approaching an intersection into separate pedestrian and bike crossings and then recombine them into a MUP on the other side?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Different municipalities have different approaches. So I like the city of Ottawa, the example I showed at Seneca and Colonel By, they did just that. They separated and then brought it back. But it might not always be practical to do that. Some could argue that there are safety benefits in separating users at the crossing. Makes it easier for motorists to, in the amount of workload to get through an intersection, separating users sometimes helps, but it varies, and there's flexibility in Book 18 on how it's done. So it's really up to a municipality to figure out and develop their standards based on the guidance.
Cool, thanks. Doug asks, for the bike signals, do the traffic controllers need to be updated to accommodate additional phases, or how does that work from a controller perspective? Do you have any insight into that aspect of the facility?
Yeah. You definitely need enough slots. In my experience, generally the traffic controllers are sufficient to accommodate the additional phases without having upgrades. But if you have really old equipment, then maybe it does need to be updated. But that would have to be investigated on a case-by-case basis.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Nelson comments, great work, Sean. This book is really informative, and your presentation makes the many pages of the book more accessible. So I would definitely agree with that. That's yeah, this is great. Lewis asks, at the intersection where there is no cycling, where there's no cycle crossing signals, are cyclists intended to cross on the advanced pedestrian signal before lights turn green to vehicles? It's a good philosophical question.
When we have like a leading pedestrian interval, the pedestrians get a head start. If there's no bicycle signal, I'm thinking that cyclists are using the motorist signal, and so they shouldn't be using the pedestrian signal. But I mean, that's a bit of a gray area. I know like in York Region, they typically don't use bicycle signals for their combined Crossrides. So cyclists are using the pedestrian signal and are in the boulevard. But generally, no, they shouldn't be using the pedestrian signal. And if you have got dedicated facilities in the boulevard, you really should have dedicated a bicycle signal as well.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Colin again. These are huge improvements for cyclists compared to 7 to 10 years ago. Definitely.
I would agree. Yeah, we've definitely taken a lot of the lessons learned from all the work that's been done across Ontario and globally too. We've come a long way, I think, in terms of cycling design.
Yeah, and I did know that the nomograph did kind of prescribe separated facilities a lot more frequently than in previous guidance. Part of what we are seeing a policy shift kind of from a city perspective. Do you consider those to be a necessary part of the solution for engaging that demographic of cyclists that you're trying to get? Like, it's not just the implementation here, it's also the greater policy and kind of mentality shift that's going on within cities.
Yeah, absolutely, and really taking a complete streets approach to it. So considering the needs of all users now. But before, in the past, like it was very auto-centric, but now it's really taking a holistic look. And there are a number of trade-offs. Like retrofitting streets is not easy. There's always decisions to be made and trade-offs, constraints to avoid. But there's lots of guidance now to help.
Cool. Yeah, definitely. So Nelson, again, I noted in Ottawa, where a MUP approaches a street mid-block, that not only the crossing signalized, but pedestrian approach along the street. Isn't that overdone? Examples, Carling near Preston and Albert between Bronson and Empress.
Okay, I think I know what that means, is that you've signalized, like, for example, this location, we've got a T intersection, but it's also signalized on this leg, right, for cyclists. They've got a bike signal here. So in my opinion, yeah, it is a little overdone. You'd probably get low compliance of a cyclist stopping here if they get a red signal. There's no chance of a motorist coming and they just have to yield to pedestrians making that crossing. But I mean, there's debate still is ongoing on that one.
And I guess if it's responsive to a local condition too, that might make sense in that perspective, but not necessarily as a general case too.
Yeah.
So Nelson, what does book 18 and 12 say about that? I guess that was a follow-up to that question.
So book 12 is all about traffic signals, and it's more about the implementation of like how long the arm length is and how high it should be installed and whatnot. And book 18 is more about the signal phasing strategies that can be incorporated. I'm not specifically sure what it says about this scenario though.
Sure.
Yeah.
Emmanuel, does the new book 18 have any guidance on ideal curb angles where cyclists have to cross a depressed curb to switch from on-road to off-road? Good question.
Generally, we want to have a taper no less than 3 to 1. The curb angle, actually, when we're going from road to boulevard, there's actually a recommendation to not have a curb at all, and you can have like a smooth transition. So I've seen that done on a couple of projects where there's a break in the curb just to have that smooth transition. But also it comes down to construction practices. You don't want to have a lip, that it can be quite jarring for a cyclist having to cross. And if they're doing it at an angle too, that could potentially be a hazard.
Colin, referring to Emmanuel's comment, I don't like the Riverdale example. Bikes should cross the curb perpendicularly so wheels don't slide along the curb. Good consideration. Differential settlement will occur over time as well, and he's had personal experience of that being a problem.
Yeah.
Would there also be, I guess, driver considerations from a visual perspective of, you know, whether or not it's their facility versus another one, and confusion if there is no curb as a delineation tool? Examples of that.
Generally not. Yeah, I'm just trying to think. I think at our Clark Avenue, we did have a couple of cases where we didn't put the curb at the crossing. I'll just show it. See if I can pull that up. Might not be up to date here, but in Street View. Yeah, it doesn't have the markings yet, but driveways. Yeah, I know that there was at least one incident that caused the city to consider, yeah, here we go. So reconsider the use of curb at these turning points. So we've got a driveway here, and instead of having the curb continue right across, you know, you could see that the cycle track continues right across. So there's a smooth crossing. You don't have to cross another curb.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think like the delineation from this curb really shows where motorists should go. You could have like a green radius as well to encourage a motorist to stay out of the cycle track, but it wasn't needed in this case.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you, Sean. This was an amazing presentation. I learned a lot. I'm sure everybody else did too. If they, I guess if they want to investigate if a full day or half day session is good for their organization, how would they go about contacting you for that?
Yeah, you can actually go through the Ontario Traffic Council. They're the ones who are arranging the sessions. There is a public session next week on Tuesday. I'm not sure if there are any spaces left, but there will be future sessions as well.
Good. I'm sure they're awesome. So yeah, if you want to find out more, and if you want a deeper dive, then definitely go look into that. So thank you so much, everybody, for attending today. This was a fun presentation, and we're glad to have you all here. So until the next time, take care.